When we start talking about interactivity, we do not get very far unless we start talking about coding. Now, before we get going on coding, we need to have a basic understanding of the basic concepts of programming in any object-oriented programming language. So in our case, we're using ActionScript, which is a cousin of JavaScript, and they follow basically the same format in the way they are scripted. One of the first concepts that we need to talk about, and it's something that we saw during the lecture, is the concept of a variable. A variable, it's a container that can contain any type of data that we want to put into it. So one of the most common variables that we use are numbers, and that is a variable that will contain a number. So let me go ahead and open up or create a new document here so we can talk about what these are. And so I'm just going to use ActionScript as the base. This works also for HTML5, so it works the same. JavaScript needs variables just like any other language for that matter. So in order to code anything into this program, we need to open up what is called the Actions window. The Actions window is found under Window, Actions. And when you click on that, it opens up a panel for you. Now, there are ways to code into this. One is by actually typing your code. Another one is by using what we call code snippets, which reside in here. We will be talking about code snippets in the next movie. So for now, let's take a look and see what a variable is and how to declare it. So the first things first is there are a lot of words that are keywords inside ActionScript, just like in JavaScript. Keywords are words that you cannot use for something else. So the word, for example, stop means stop. You cannot call a variable stop, or you cannot use the naming of a movie clip as stop. You can't do that because those are reserved keywords. So if I were to say something in here, if I want to declare a variable, one of the that keyword or the reserved word for declaring a variable is the word var. So when I do that, you will notice that my word turns into a purple word. Purple, green, and blue words are words that are reserved. So when the word turns into a color, that's a word that you can only use for that specific type of use. You cannot use it for anything else. So in this case, the word var means I am about to declare a variable. So let's say I want to declare a variable and I want to call that variable my number. Now the word number, the actual word number, it's a keyword. It's a reserved word, so I cannot use that. So I would have to use a variance of the name in the naming convention so that I can make it different. So if I say my number, that is not a reserved word. If I were to use the word number by itself, watch what happens. If I type number, the word number, or with a capital N, it will turn into a blue word, which like I said a second ago, anything that is a color that is other than black will be a reserved word. So I want to change that to my number. And this will be basically the name of the variable that I am creating. Now that I have declared the variable my number, I need to tell the program what kind of a variable this is, what will be housed in this variable. And what I want to do is I do that by putting a colon, and then I can tell it what type of variable I want to make this. So I want to make it an actual number variable. So if I start typing number, you will notice that the drop-down gives me a hint, and I can go ahead and either click on it to select it, hit the return key or enter key on the PC on the keyboard, or I can simply finish typing it if I want to. You'll notice that now turned blue, and that is basically the assignment of what kind of value will be inside this variable. What will this variable house? Number is just like the variable says, the type is any number. Whether it is a fraction or a whole number, it's basically declared as a number. If you want to use only integers or whole numbers, then you would be using an int type of variable. So instead of number, you would say something like int, and then you'll notice that it gives it to you as a blue word, and that indicates that this is a reserved word. So integers are whole numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0. Numbers are anything, including integers. So 1, 1.2, 3.5, 2.375. All of that is numbers. So you choose which variable you want to use depending on what you will be housing within that variable. In this case, I want to say my variable, my number, that's the name of my variable, and then I say it's going to be of type number. What that means for you is that from now on, if I want to use the variable my number, I will be referring to whatever value I put into that variable. So if I say I want to assign a value to it, meaning I want to make it equal to something, then I'll simply say equal to, and then I can give it a value. So if I give it a value of 10, then my number from this point on will be equal to 10 until I change it. So if I want to assign that number, I can say, okay, that's the value that I want to assign to it, and I want to close it. Meaning I put a semicolon at the end of that sentence, and that means that statement is complete in my code. That statement is going to run something. It's going to create a variable called my number, then it's going to assign a data type to it, which is number, and it's going to assign a value into it, which equals to 10. Now, if I want to do another action in my program, which is called a trace, tracing, basically you'll notice that it turns into a blue word when I hit the space bar. So I'm going to say trace, and then I'm going to open up a parentheses, and then I want it to trace my number. Now, what does trace do? Trace basically reads back to me whatever I have inside the parentheses. In this case, I am telling the program, assign the value to the variable my number, and then read it back to me. Tell me what has been assigned into it. So let me put a semicolon to close that. And what this does when I run it, when I test the program, is going to open up this output window here. You see that little tab on the interface, and it's going to put a 10 inside that window. Watch. So to test this movie, I am going to go to Control, Test, or Control Enter as the shortcut, or Command Enter on the Mac. So if I do that, the movie's going to run. A window opens up that's empty. There's nothing on my stage, but over here on the output, you'll notice that it gave me a return. It says 10. So it's reading back whatever I had assigned into my number. So if I simply say here, instead of 10, I say A plus 2, that is going to return a 10 as well when I test it. Watch. So it does create the operation just like in math. It would create an operation at that point. Now, there are other types of operands, as you will see throughout the rest of the semester, that we can use. Operands being these little symbols here that we can use in different ways within ActionScript and within the programming language. So things like 2 pluses will indicate adding a value, what we call an addition assignment, or an increasing. We also have subtraction assignment or subtraction if we want to subtract one value, a value of 1 out of a number. So there are many different kinds of operators that we can use that will help us sort of talk in machine language, that will help us sort of logically think of how we want things to be expressed within our programs. Now, that is basically the concept of a variable and how to create it. Now, let me remove all that code really quick, and let me go ahead and create a movie clip on the stage. So if I want to create a movie clip on the stage, and I'm going to create a circle this time. So I want to put a circle on the stage, and I'm going to select it. This is, as of now, a drawing object. If I want to make that something that I can work with, a class in this case, I need to turn it into a symbol. So I'll go Modify, Convert to Symbol. And I'm going to give it a name of Circle. And I want to make sure that it is a movie clip. And the reason for that is because when I make this a movie clip, it can become available to my code, meaning I can control it via code. So if I click OK on that, you'll notice that my object properties give me the option to name the instance of that movie clip on the stage. So if I want to do that, now this becomes available to me via code as long as I give it a name. So if I give it the name Circle here, anytime I refer to Circle on my code, I will be talking about this specific instance of the movie clip. So about this specific one. If I were to bring new ones from the library, you'll notice that those do not have an instance name. So I would have to name them accordingly as well. But this one is called Circle as far as the program is concerned. So if I want to change the values of that class, that instance of this circle movie on the stage, then I would use basically the same principle as with a variable. Now that I know the name of that particular class, it can be treated almost like a variable on the code. What that means is anytime I want to do something to it, if I say circle and I want to change its property x, the x value of that particular circle, then I will say circle.x, and that it's referring to the x position of that particular movie clip. So right now, the x position of that movie clip on the stage is 89 pixels. So if I say plus equals, that means I am adding whatever value. It's called an addition assignment. I am saying, let's make it with equals first. So I want to say plus equals. I'm going to say first with just equals. I'm just going to assign the value. Circle x, the value x of circle equals to 10, semicolon. When I run my movie, what's going to happen is my movie clip is going to jump to the left. Let me make it more evident. I'm going to place it here. And when I render the movie, the circle gets pushed in that direction, which means I moved it via code. Now, let's go ahead and move it back to this side. And instead of doing equals, I'm going to say plus equals 10. What that's going to do is it's going to look at where it's at right now, which is at 98 pixels, and then it's going to push it 10 pixels to the right. Let me push it 100 pixels so that it becomes more evident. Take note of where this is at right now. If I run the test, you'll notice that my movie clip jumped quite a bit. And that is because I moved it through that line of code 100 pixels to the right. So that's what operators do. These operators, this is what is called an addition assignment, meaning I can add a value, this value, and assign it to whatever property I am trying to change on this side. In this case, whatever the value of circle X was, I added 100 pixels and assigned it back to it. So now instead of it being right now being 98, when I run the program, it will be 198. So that is what operators do. So we've seen variables. We know that when we bring in a movie clip from the library onto the stage, that becomes an instance of that movie clip or class, what we call a class, onto the stage. And then we can start changing the different properties of that particular instance of that movie on the stage, including X value, Y value, all the different properties, meaning position, scale, rotation, alpha transparency, and we can also change filters. We can change, a whole bunch of other things that we can, whatever we can keyframe on that object can be done via code. So those are the properties of that class, of that instance of that movie on the stage, and they can be changed via operators. So that is, those are variables. Variables are basically the names that we use to call things. And operators, which are the symbols that we use to make operations on the stage. And the properties, which is what we attach to each one, or what we call from each one of those instances of movie clips on the stage. That is how we type code. Say, for example, I wanted to do this in a different way. If I want to use my snippets, let me remove the code again, and I still have the circle movie in there, but I have no code attached to the actual movie. If I want to add a snippet of code, what's going to happen is when I click on snippet, my movie clip will create an actions layer, and it will place the actions inside a frame inside that layer. As I explained in class, actions can live in keyframes, empty keyframes. They can live inside movies, and they can live outside of the program in what we call AS files, or ActionScript files in this case. Just like JavaScript files live on JS files or JSON files if you're using a different type of coding, or jQuery files if you're using jQuery. Basically, that's the same thing for ActionScript. It can create separate libraries, let's call them that, of code that reside outside of the actual HTML file or whatever application you're exporting to. So in this case, I want to create that code via snippet. So to create a snippet code, I would go ahead and go into code snippets. And since I am working on a ActionScript file, you'll notice that my file it's not called Canvas, it's simply called Untitled2. That tells me that this is an ActionScript file. So if I drop down in the menu, these are all my options for APIs, for things that I can actually add to that particular clip by simply selecting it and saying, okay, I want to do something to this. What do you want to do? Well, let's animate it. If I want to animate it and I want to move it horizontally, which is what we did a second ago, let me select that, make sure that it is named under the instance name, and then double click on what you want to do. So if I say move horizontally, it's gonna give me a bunch of stuff on the actions window. Anything that resides between anything that's grayed out, that resides between a / and an asterisk, and a /, it's comments. And these comments, when you do snippets, are very important. They actually tell you what the code is doing. So the code, they basically explains to you what the code will be doing. You'll notice that the majority of the real estate was taken up by that explanation. And they give you instructions on what to do in order to modify the actual code. So if you want to change the code, they tell you how exactly by reading those instructions. And they also explains to you, it also explains to you what the code is going to do. But you'll notice that, let me go ahead and remove this really quick. You'll notice that all that's left is basically the same code that we had typed before. It basically says, oh, so you want to move it by how many pixels, boom. So it tells you, and by default, it gives you 100, but you can always go back and change that number if you want to another number. And when you run the program, the code works just the same. So that's another way to access or start accessing your code to begin with. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that your programs will run from top to bottom. Unless inside the program you tell it to circle back elsewhere within the program, and we do that through functions, your program will always read from top to bottom. It will execute from top to bottom. What that means for you is that if you do a change up at the top, and then you intend for that change to be continued at the bottom, you need to make sure that you place the lines of code where they need to be as you run the program. This is where flow charting comes in handy, because it gives you an idea as to where code should go. That's one thing. The second thing is you'll notice that, as I said before, the program, when I created the snippet, created a new layer called actions, and then it added that code into that frame right there. You can see that there's a little A on that frame. That indicates that that frame has an action in it, or code. You don't have to have all of your code into one frame. It's advisable that you do not split your code all over the program. You need to make sure that you have specific locations where you have code. But I know it is necessary sometimes to split it up, especially if you want to stop actions within movie clips that are embedded. So if you have a movie clip that is playing and you want it to stop at some point inside that movie clip, you need to go into the frame where you want to stop, add an empty keyframe in a separate layer called actions, and add your stop action into the movie clip. So for example, let's say we wanted this to move across the screen. Let me go ahead and close this actions panel really quick. Again, let me reduce it in size so we actually can see what we're doing. And let me actually move it out of the way. Same thing with snippets. I'm going to close that. So I want to make this is a symbol already, and I want to move it across the screen for on 2 seconds. So let's go ahead and extend these two guys to 2 seconds, selecting those 2 frames. I'll press the F5 key on the keyboard, or I can go ahead and say insert frames from my drop-down menu. Now I have extended how long that frame exists. Now I want to tag it. I want to tag that layer, and I want to add motion tween to it. Then I'm going to go place my time marker at the end of my timeline and simply move my circle across the screen. So my circle is now moving. If I test this, you'll notice that my circle only moves 100 pixels, and it keeps on moving every now and then. And the reason for that is because this is going across, and then it's jumping back over here. And when it jumps, it reads my program. Remember, the program says move the circle X plus equals 50. So it keeps on moving it 50 pixels to the right, because that animation keeps on repeating every time I enter this frame. When I exit here, I enter that frame. If I don't want that to happen, then I need to stop the program here. And to do so, I need to include in the actions window, or in the actions layer, sorry, I need to include a new frame. So I want to go ahead and select that frame and go to the drop-down menu for frames, insert a blank keyframe, and then I need to add a stop action on that frame. To add a stop action, you could simply type stop, open close parentheses, and semicolon. If you don't remember how to type this up, you can always use your snippet. So let me delete that, go to the snippet, and what do I want to do? I want to change my timeline. I want to stop my timeline. So I will go to actions, and I want to see if I have a stop. And so if I say stop a movie clip, let's see if that works for me. Double click on that. There is nothing here that has been selected. I want the stage to be stopped. So it is a timeline issue. Does it have a, do I have stop at this frame? There it is, stop at this frame. When I double click on that, notice that this gives you the explanation in the grayed out text, and it gives you the stop action, and it creates a little A on that empty keyframe at the end of the timeline. So that means that when I test this movie, it's gonna move the little ball 50 pixels, and then it's not gonna move anymore because my playback head has stopped over here. It's not moving in the actual running of the movie. So my animation is stopped at that point, and it only executed this frame. So it is not advisable that you split your code like that, as like I said before, but sometimes it is necessary, especially like I said in embedded movies. So that is basically how we would be controlling our timeline through calls, through specific keywords, or through commands that we create, such as play and stop, and how we control, how we can go ahead and use different, where to place the code within our different areas of the timeline. You'll notice that usually I would create an empty keyframe. It's good practice to create an empty keyframe every time that you want to add code, and then tell it where to go. Now, as I said before, try not to split the code, but if it's necessary, say for example, you're coding everything on your main timeline and you have item areas where you're gonna have animations, and you want that animation to play and stop until your user does something, then you might need to have these stop actions spread all over the place. Now, if you want a piece of code that you want to exist throughout the entirety of your program, then you should have a separate actions layer where you have that keyframe with that code occupy the entirety of the timeline. So if I wanted this to still exist in that frame, I would want to have a separate action. Say for example, if I have buttons and I want those buttons to be active, when my timeline plays back and it stops here, if it goes to that point, my buttons will not be visible to the code anymore, so they will not react. If I need that to happen, my code for the buttons should be in a separate layer. So this is where things start getting a little bit tangled up when you're working on a single timeline, because now you're being forced to split your code everywhere. That is not good practice. It will work. And the reason why it's not good practice is because if you split your code and if you have an error or a mistake, then you have a bunch of places to check for code. That can be problematic and time consuming to debug, and as opposed to if you have all your code in one single frame. So that's why it is not advisable to do that, to split the code. But if you have to, you can, and it will work. Okay, so that is the way we start setting up things in order to add items onto the stage, creating variables, working with operands, and using keywords in our programs.